Welcome to this audio-video interview, or better, to this multiple audio-video interview in the days of coronavirus, which, amongst all the other things, forced us to better evaluate what we already had right under the nose. Also, but the possibility to use those tools in order to realize interviews like this. The interview is realized in the framework of the European project entitled after Intercultural Competences for Adult Educators with the acronym INCrEAsE. The project is funded by the European Commission in the framework of the Erasmus Plus program, Strategic Partnership for Adult Education. The project aims to develop intercultural communication of adult educators working in formal and informal educational settings in order to help them to overcome the challenges arising from their everyday work with multicultural and multilingual learners population. So the focus of the project is on adult educators, and 3 of them accepted to be the sacrificial victims of my interviews. So first of all, I take the opportunity to thank them. They are Lavinia Bracci, Fiora Biagi, and Elena Cellai. Just few words about them, and then I will let them introduce themselves and to speak about their experiences. Lavinia Bracci is founder and director of Siena Italian Studies Intercultural Education and Study Center, which hosts educational exchange programs for undergraduate students. Amongst the other things, and she will tell more about her activities, she created the full immersion culture, content, and service approach to develop reflective intercultural competencies. Then we have Fiora Biagi, is professor and researcher. As teacher, she has been working as a teacher of Italian language and culture for foreign students, as well as teacher of English for Italian learners. As researcher, her areas of interest are language acquisition, language teaching and didactics, intercultural studies, intercultural competence. And then we have Elena Cellai, external consultant of Nuova Associazione Culturale Ulisse. She has been working for over 12 years as an instructor of the study abroad programs Siena Italian Studies and Abroad Siena. Amongst her experiences, I would personally like to highlight the fact that she gives classes on politics and political participation to the participants in the World House Project, which hosts young people from Eastern Europe, America, and Africa as spokesperson of degenerated local conflicts. Those were just few words of introduction of the adult educators who will be interviewed by me and who have been involved in the INCrEAsE project. But I would like to leave the floor to you and to kindly invite you to present yourself, your job, your profession, focusing in particular on the context you are working in as adult educator and which types of multicultural learners you got and you get in contact with. And I would like to start with Lavinia.
Hi, so I'm Lavinia, and as Antonio pointed out, I'm the founder and director of Siena Italian Studies, a center for intercultural exchange for both undergraduate and graduate students. I founded this center in 2004. Before that, I had been co-directing another program for American students that was a more traditional program, traditional in the tradition of American study abroad in Europe and elsewhere in the world. And I was not very satisfied with that type of program because there was nothing like what I consider being something that can really unite us as Europeans, that is being used to be fully immersed in different linguistic and cultural contexts. And American programs abroad have, and we cannot generalize, of course, but have a tradition of island programs, bubbles, where students from the US just go in a program abroad and they spend time among peers, they live in apartments with peers, they have their own American professors who are teaching them. On the other hand, being myself, I can say, multilingual person because I've studied 8, 9 languages and in different phases of my life spoke them to different levels of proficiency. I always thought, okay, this is not what it means studying abroad. This is not what it means intercultural education. This is not what it means intercultural exchange, intercultural competence, nothing like that. So I decided to found another program that is the one I'm still co-directing despite the coronavirus that is probably maybe creating some issues to all of us, but this program was thought from the very beginning as a real full immersion, which means only host families as option for accommodation, which means mandatory service learning for all the students, because in the years I had worked for the other program, I have to say that I had learned many things from the American culture, of course. And one of them was the pedagogy of service learning, which I, or let's say us at Siena Italian Studies, introduced in Italy before anybody else. So we actually started before this program with the previous program, and then with the SIS, I introduced that as a pedagogy that all the students had to be exposed to, especially because I thought that this would guarantee full immersion, and was some sort of challenge I posed myself and the rest of the faculty, because I thought if students do service learning in addition to homestays, they will be really immersed. They will be immersed during when they're at home, but they will be immersed during the day where they're not in class, instead of just being together with Americans walking around the streets of Siena and eating gelatos. They will also be doing something for the community. They will be engaged in the community. And so I started this new program with these premises. And starting from this, we, together with the faculty and someone like Fiora, I think, was there from the very beginning, and Elena joined us a little bit after that. We worked on the development of this approach to teaching language and culture. That was called FIX at first, an acronym that stands for Full Immersion, Culture, Content and Service, and that later on became EUFIX because it was co-founded by the Lifelong Learning Program Key Activity 2, and we had 2 partners in Europe where the approach was implemented. After that, we put a lot of attention also to the students' outcomes. So we did a lot of work in terms of assessment of the students' competence. I mean, competence students gain through our approach is what we call the reflective intercultural competence. So we created an assessment tool that is called RICA, Reflective Intercultural Competence Assessment, and that allowed us to assess students' competence through, we can talk about this later, but anyway, through the journals, which is one of the main components of our approach. The students we get here are mostly Americans, but again, the idea, and it's an idea that is, it's a challenge, even after so many years, it's still a challenge, is to have students coming from everywhere in the world. And we have, because every year we get someone coming from other cultures, but the percentage of those who can afford a semester abroad, that it's not an Erasmus semester, even if we give scholarships of any kind, but it's very limited. Nevertheless, I think we have a really multicultural environment because American students are multicultural in themselves, and the students we receive, even when we have one student from Ecuador, for example, or one student from China, or one student from Thailand, even if it's one out of 20, the input that the students brings to the group is incredible. In addition to that, in our center, we also host a group of refugees that they take Italian classes with our American students. So we have classes where these completely different groups of learners meet together, and that is also a very interesting project that we want to for the future, we want to work a lot in this direction. Yes. So I don't know if you have more specific questions or something I didn't.
No, for instance, it's perfect.
Okay.
Let's leave the floor to Fiora.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Fiora Biagi, and I've been working with Lavinia, as she said, from the beginning. And actually, I won't repeat myself, but most of the things she said, the work that has been done at Siena Italian Studies, we have collaborated side by side, both in the developing of specific programs and the creation of new courses, and the research work on the assessment, on the development of intercultural competence. So I would say that the work that I've been doing with Lavinia is the most part of my experience with multicultural setting students, and with an environment in which the development of intercultural competence is very important. Nevertheless, I've been teaching, I've been in the field of second language education for more than 20 years now, and I worked in the past in some other contexts, both as a teacher of English for Italian students and as a teacher, of course, of Italian for foreign students. And in both these experiences, in both these contexts, I've always had multicultural students. I work with multicultural students. One experience was a school of language in Siena, so of course there were people from all over the world, and actually it was very, very multicultural. Other experiences brought into play different cultural backgrounds of people living in Siena, living in Italy, because I taught English to groups of young people attending professional courses for becoming hairdressers and beauticians. So actually the diversity inside this group were very, very evident, because most of these young people were not of Italian origin. So it was actually a multicultural context. Yes, this is more or less my experience. And of course, Lavinia was explicit and precise enough for all the work that we have been doing at Siena Italian Studies. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Fiora. And last but not least, Elena, please present yourself.
Okay, so hello everybody, my name is Elena. Differently from Lavinia and Fiora, I am not very active in language acquisition since I graduated in international relations and political studies. So I've been collaborating with Siena Italian Study Abroad program for now over 12 years, I guess, if I do the math correctly, and there I teach politics-related topics. So basically all connected to the European integration programs and European economics, as well as international business, and topics related to mobility in the sense of migrations, both intra-European and extra-European migrations. At Siena Italian Studies, I especially teach to Americans, as Lavinia underlined, even though we have a bunch of other nationalities and guys and girls coming from other contexts. And then I also collaborate with another couple of institutions where I can have the opportunity to meet very super diverse students. I collaborate with a project that is called Rondine, City of Peace. This is a little hamlet in the countryside of Tuscany in the area of Arezzo. And this is an NGO actually that for several years have been hosting young people Normally they are graduate students coming from conflict areas. They are there for 2 years, and they share a program together at Rondine, so at this little hamlet. They live together, they take classes of Italian there and classes over transversal competencies as well as on politics, and this is what I teach. And then they can join, they have scholarship from their government, and they can join master's studies and programs in Tuscany universities. Since they come from countries in conflict between them, and not only the multicultural aspect is very evident, but also relations and intercultural dialogue is absolutely an urgency for them, because they are supposed after 2 years to have acquired the tools to be then political leaders in their countries and try to, let's say, mitigate the conflict situations between their countries. So I've had the opportunities to meet in the same classroom Palestinian with Israeli students, Armenian with Russian students, Kosovo students coming from Kosovo and from Serbia and from Albania, and many African students as well. So the level of multi-language as well as multicultural and diversity is maximum. And the situation is delicate because those countries are still all were recently in conflict between them. And then I also coordinate the international relations of a master's degree at the University of Siena. That is a totally different area of studies because it's a master in vaccinology and drug development, so it has nothing to do with multicultural environment, but the master is addressed to international students, in particular from countries that are, let's say, having health systems that are not really developed. So all of them come from Africa and the Middle East and Asia, so they also live in very different countries, and they experience a super diversity situation because they have to live together for over 3 months in Siena, but they all come from different countries, and they are not students of humanities, so they never were in contact with multicultural or intercultural dialogue. They are doctors, they are dentists, they are coming from other disciplines, but they have to live together, and they also have classes on intercultural dialogue because they need to work together in international groups. So that's basically my profile.
Okay, thanks to your short biography, you confirmed that to choose you as adult educators in multicultural settings was quite a good choice. And on the basis of your experience in dealing with multicultural learners, I would kindly ask you to share this kind of experience, in particular, what kind of problems you had to face, if there were some successful experiences, best practice you want to share and you want to let better know to the other people who will be involved in this project. And again, we will start with Lavinia.
Okay, this is a tough question in the sense that in a way one could come up with a list of the famous do's and don'ts of things that one would recommend or successes one can have or not have. In general, I feel at Siena Italian Studies, I feel we have been pretty successful in the sense that we never forgot that every day is a challenge. So I think the best thing to do in this type of job is to like the challenge and to know that only going through this challenge and every day questioning what you're doing and what your experience is, every day is different. You cannot expect students to always pose the same type of challenges. Of course, there are categories of things that you can have and you know that will happen over and over again, but they will always be different because they have to do with the individuum, and the individuum is always one. And so I would say that in the end, it is very important to accept the challenge, to be open-minded, to never think that you are open-minded, to always, because even being open-minded can lead you to think that, oh, you know everything. No, it's never true. There's always one day when you discover that, okay, you had not thought about this possibility. So I think this is what I would try to teach if I had to any person who has to deal with a multicultural class. To be always ready for a new intercultural challenge. It means to be always ready to something you are not prepared for. And if you accept that, then at a certain point, it becomes the routine. And if you like that routine, there are ups and downs, but you will always expect the ups to come back. So that's what I would say.
Okay, thanks, Lavinia. And let's go with Fiora.
Yes, well, I completely agree with Lavinia. And I would say that the word challenge is the one that came to my mind, you know, when you asked that question. Actually, anyway, I would build off that, saying that the disposition that teachers should have towards a multicultural group of students, a group of persons who come from different experiences, life and cultural experiences, should be that of be willing to learn. I always learn something from my students. So that's very important. Teachers should not be teaching something to students in this case, in this environment, but should be open-minded, but not too sure to be open-minded, as Lavinia said, and to listen to what the students are bringing to class. Another important factor, I think, is curiosity. Teachers should be curious, should be willing to learn, should be willing to listen, and should raise this curiosity in students too. Curiosity which is accompanied by respect, of course, by suspension of judgment, by the willingness to be open to other life experiences and cultural experiences. I guess we'll go into details later, right?
Yeah, you are right. So let's listen to Elena.
Well, I fully agree with what both Lavinia and Fiora stated. So it's not easy to add up other elements, but I would like, yes, to underline the suspension of judgment that Fiora mentioned, because this is something that I think is necessary not only in the person of the instructor, teacher, facilitator, moderator, whatever you want to call the figure of the adult educator, because this is not only limited to teachers, it can be a moderator, it can be a facilitator, etc. So the suspension of judgment is something that we have to really guarantee to ourselves. So we have to be open-minded as well as loyal to ourselves, but to recognize that we always have to question ourselves. And the suspension of judgment is also something that should be constantly repeated to the students as well, because if it's difficult for us, let alone for the students, especially for those who were not really exposed to intercultural or as I said, humanities, and especially I experienced this with the doctors. This is really their least preoccupation. They're there to learn other things, scientific concepts, but they have to do it in an international environment. So the suspension of judgment is really a value of both teachers, educators, and the audience. And the teachers and the educators should really focus and repeat it constantly to the listeners, because this is something that is the real challenge, and what we ask to the others and what we have to ask to ourselves first.
Okay, thanks, Elena. You are in the bad position of being the last one, so every time you are asked to find something new. So if you want, we can revert the order. We will find some other solutions, not to leave Elena to look for something different from the other who replied before her. So you are, all of you, adult educators. Why did you choose this kind of job, and which were your expectations before starting in dealing with the multicultural learners? And we will start with Elena.
Okay, So, well, why did I choose this kind of job? I've always been fascinated by diversity, and I think this happened by contrast because I was born and raised in a very little village of Tuscany, and my family all originated from the same area, being born all of them in the same village. So actually, I was raised in a very, very narrow-minded environment, if you wish. And that really acted by contrast to me, because since I was a little girl, I was always interested in diversity. And that was possible to me because since I was a teenager, my municipality, even though was very little, was very active in European collaboration and projects. And so we had the opportunity to experience town twinnings projects, and I had the possibility to travel Europe, to visit other little villages, and to be in contact with rural populations that normally are the least exposed to multicultural situations. This is proven also by political events like the Brexit, where they demonstrated, like, for example, rural communities being less exposed to diversities are those who are more worried. And so they tend to contrast diversity. That's very different from urban population or very, let's say, diverse families in which parents as well as other members of families introduce their children to diversity. That was not the case in, or is not still the case in many rural environments. So that acted to me as a sort of curiosity event. And so after that, I decided to study international relations because I was very interested in diversity and in the political aspects of diversity. So the European integration process have always been very, very interested to me. And when I graduated, after graduation, I found European projects and the big accent that the European Union posed on education, especially students as well as adult education, as a field of action. And then I started. And I really expected to be exposed to diversity, and yes, that happened. I also expected to be exposed to many challenges, and that also happened. I expected to feel sometimes insecure, and that also happened, and I think it's good that happened, because as we said, we always have to question ourselves. So many challenges, but I think I am very lucky, because if I think where I was when I started, as Fiora said, the students learn, but we always learn, and maybe we even learn the most, because students are always different, and so always we have the opportunity to learn from them and from their diversity. So yeah, that's my experience.
Okay, thanks, Elena. And then now we'll go. The second one is always Fiora.
Sorry.
Okay, here we go. Sorry, I couldn't find the right spot for the microphone. Okay, well, I must say that in terms of biographical data, my life experience is very similar to Elena's, because I was born in Siena, was raised up in Siena. My father is from Siena. My mother is actually from the place where Elena lives, so very, very close. So I'm not multicultural, really not multicultural at all, and my family is not too. But I think the starting point was my love, my passion for languages. Since when I was a teenager, I wanted to study languages. So everything started from there. Then, of course, together with language, there comes the culture. And so it was a kind of a chain of events that brought me to study languages, study linguistics. And I must say that I like studying a lot. So I really put a lot of things together. And finally, I must say, thanks to Lavinia, I found my way in this teaching world. As Elena said, we're not only teachers, we're educators, we're facilitators. And teaching Italian, teaching English, knowing what's behind the language, so the culture that lay behind the superficial expressions of communication was very, very intriguing for me. And that's, you know, where everything started. Of course, when it comes to teaching or being the facilitator or the mediator in a multicultural setting, this is exposed to the maximum. So that's probably my path along the way.
Thanks, Fiora. And finally, Lavinia.
Allora, my experience is somewhat similar, it's somewhat different from what both Fiora and Elena have said, because I was also born in Siena. So even for me, Siena was always, from when I was really little, very small. So I was trying to find something different, because as Elena said, the same is valid for me. I was always really in love with anything that is different, with diversity, always, always. On the other hand, my mom came from Rome. So when I was very little, I lived a lot in Siena and a lot in Rome. And I remember every time she took me to Rome, which happened twice a month we went to Rome by train. And when we arrived at the station, I took a bus there. I still remember that bus, bus 64, from the station to San Pietro, where my grandma lived. And on that bus, I was a little child, but I could see all these people coming from all over the world. I was born in 1966, so it was 67. So it was not, Siena was really just Sienese people from the Contrade. Was not nothing like it is today. So that bus for me was really, every time I thought, I want to understand what these people say, all these languages they speak, where do they come from? Why do they make this strange sound when they talk? All these things, they wear these strange clothes that they were wearing. So I think this opposition about these two different worlds, where I had to grow up, Siena, and on the other hand, where I always loved to go and visit Rome because I could see all these different cultures, together with, as Fiora was saying, my incredible passion for languages. I studied so many languages. I started when I was 2. I had this fascination for Swedish, and I was speaking Swedish before I was speaking Italian. Some strange gene was going there. That then later changed into a more, of course, mature attitude in terms of being willing to understand what is behind the words, what is the culture that is behind that language, all these things. So that's more or less. So we have, I think in general, being born in these small places can really give you a push towards intercultural studies in a way.
I took that bus several times, and it was, I would say, it was always late, but it is not uncommon for the local transport in Rome. Anyway, the INCrEAsE project mainly focuses on intercultural communication. On the basis of what you just said, I would summarize up, and I would say intercultural communication means be willing to learn, active listening, curiosity, loyalty. Do you think intercultural communication was already part of your background? It was something which was part of your being, human being, which was natural part of you, or in some way education had a strong impact in increasing this kind of skill? And now we'll start with Lavinia.
For me, I would say there was part of myself, like deeply ingrained in myself, because in terms of education, I didn't receive anything that would have led me to that. Elementary school here was, well, really nothing. In those terms, middle school, nothing. Liceo, nothing. Of course, then when I went to the university, I studied what I liked. So that's a different thing, you know. But I don't think I received any formal, let's say, any formal input from the education or the background. I received, I think, a lot of, as I was saying with the bus example, a lot of informal input, but because I think that was my attitude. Then who knows why I had that attitude? That's a different talk. But I don't think, and I think Italy is still very, even if so much has been done, but I think Italy is still very much behind, and there is still a lot to do in these terms. So when I went to school, I definitely didn't receive that type of education. I cannot even remember one professor at school that had the right, not the right, there's nothing right, but had some intercultural perception, sensitivity, attitude that would share with us in class. So I don't know, that was my experience.
Okay, now just to change, Elena.
Okay, well, I believe that there's something within us, something maybe we were born with, that led us to this path. But really, if there is a moment in which I don't remember if it was yesterday or today, that is the day to thank a teacher. I think it was yesterday. So I would like to thank my elementary school teacher, my maestra Tiziana, because she was the one that understood my curiosity. And I was lucky enough, even though I was living in a rural village, to have in class a Swiss guy, a guy coming from Switzerland, and for a year, a Roma guy, because he was with the circus, with the carousel. And so he was in class with us. And that, you can imagine in the 80s, in a rural village of Tuscany, the difficulties. And this woman made mutual curiosity, mutual learning possible with just her attitude, because she was not instructed, she didn't receive any indications from the formal bodies, but she made it possible. She made possible for us to live, to coexist in this situation, and especially with the Roma child. And then in the middle school or in the liceo, nothing, but I was lucky to get a lot of non-formal education opportunities, so youth projects, traineeships, town twinning projects, and there is also the moment to thank the European Union, not because this is the European project, but really without the EU, without the initiatives of the EU, I wouldn't have had the opportunity to travel Europe, to be within other peers of my age in the 90s, in the early 2000s, and then the Erasmus program. I went to Madrid, I lived in Madrid for a year, and that really, even though I didn't receive any formal course or class on intercultural, multicultural communication anyway, just the fact to have the means, also the economic means, to live in a multicultural environment was something that then coupled with my curiosity and my interest that I had since my childhood.
Thanks, Serena. Fiora?
Yes, this is a kind of difficult question for me, because now looking at me in the present, it's not always easy to distinguish what is a personal trait and what is learned during my experience. I would say that I think that some traits are part of my personality. So some personal traits such as curiosity, such as patience, such as the capacity to empathize with people. I'm not sure if you can learn them, but they are probably part of our personalities. At the same time, I don't want to say that you have to be in a certain way in order to be interculturally competent, because that's a lie. We can always learn. It's something that you can learn. Maybe it is a mixture of the two. Actually, I've had a few incredible teachers in my school career. As Lavinia and Elena said, our environment used to be very monocultural, and professors throughout our school careers were not interculturally competent, but probably because it was not something that was even in the air at the time. Well, Elena is younger than us, but you know, Lavinia and I mean, I was born in 1973, so you know, I went to school in the 80s, and I don't think that intercultural competence was something that teachers were even aware of. So probably they're not aware of it now sometimes, but many things have changed, fortunately. But yes, I would say that is a mixture of the two, both personal traits and the capacity maybe to grasp some of the input that some intelligent teachers gave us.
Okay, thanks. The next one is not a question, it's more like a game or an association of ideas, because again, going back to the definition I gave before about intercultural communication, and on the basis of what you said, you said, be willing to learn, active listening, curiosity, loyalty. So without an order, other keywords which come up to your mind to define intercultural communication, which other words do you have in your mind? So without an order, you are free. So what else do you want to add to finalize or to try to finalize this definition of intercultural communication?
Openness.
Feel free to, what?
Openness.
Okay.
Being open.
Flexibility.
Sensitivity.
Okay.
Mutual understanding as well. Mutual understanding.
Perfect.
Respect.
I'm just writing them down just to understand if they can be the basis for some other inputs later on. And
reflexive.
Okay. So as you are flexible, you mentioned flexibility, you are flexible also to change the order of the questions and the order in replying to my questions. And I think, and you also said responsibility. And do you think that there is a kind of difference between, in terms of responsibility, between being educators dealing with multicultural learners and being educators dealing with a unique cultural model, as long as it is still possible today to speak about unique cultural model? I would start with Fiora.
Here we go. Yes. Well, responsibility is part of any of the experience of any teacher, I would say. Whatever this teacher might teach, it could be physics, mathematics, chemistry, literature. Responsibility is basic, is the base, because you are raising, you are educating future citizens. Young people are in your hands. So honesty and responsibility are at the base of any kind of teaching.
Okay, Elena?
I completely agree with Fiora. Teaching, being, you are a reference point to young lives or to people, however, in need an education. So it's a job, the sort of vocation, as also the doctors have or religious persons have. It's not a job like others. You don't deal with goods, you don't deal with objects, you deal with lives in delicate, sometimes ages. And so responsibility is certainly the maximum presence for a teacher should be. I was thinking to another keyword to add to responsibility, that would be humility, because we have to be humble. We don't have to approach with the belief that we are the best. And very often there is this in the everyday discourse, we are the best. We are the best at doing this. Over in this period of pandemic, I heard so many times, as Italy, we are doing the best. The best of what? So there are many ways of doing things, and we have to learn from the others' experiences as well. So we have to be humble, and I believe that humility together with responsibility are the attitude also to favor, to boost intercultural communication in whichever group, multicultural as well as monocultural, because even in a monocultural group, then the outside world is not monocultural anymore. So this sort of responsibility also to open the horizons of people you deal with should be something that teachers should have in mind.
And if I can add, not being humble is the main point which is used by those who are against multiculturalism to attack those who work in this kind of fields. Finally, Lavinia?
Yes, no, I agree with both of them, with all of you completely. Responsibility, I think it's the same. It's the same because in the end, every person has his own culture, and it's impossible to talk about a monocultural group. I don't think nowadays, but even before, because culture is something that is different from person to person. Each person has different cultural affiliations. So I think we are always in a multicultural environment. It's just that we have to be able to recognize that. While sometimes, of course, traditional people thought, okay, this is my culture, that one is your culture. But in a class, even if everybody's Italian, let's say, and everybody speaks the same language, we all have different cultures. So we always have the same responsibility, and we always have to be respectful, we have to be humble, we have to be ready for the challenge, we have to be open-minded and accept the culture of each person, because this is what we have to do, I think, and learn from them.
Okay, thanks. We are going to the end of this interview. We have been speaking about you as adult educators, but let's think about your learners. What is the impact of multicultural education activities on the learners? Does it really change attitudes and behaviors? And let's go with Lavinia now.
Yes, definitely changes, especially, yes, with everybody. What I can say, again, I'm a big fan of service in the community, engagement, service learning activities, because I think that in this type of situation, students working next to the locals can really change their attitudes, can really widen their not just the perception of the other culture, but the perception of their own culture, the perception of who they are. They can always learn something. So I think the impact is huge, and we have seen and assessed this with our students, and I'm surprised every day by what I see. Even now, not right now, unfortunately, but even in these last years, let's say, when we always talk about how students have more difficulties to learn, how it's becoming more and more difficult to teach. But on the other hand, I have to say that with the engagement in the community, you can always see incredible results in terms of increasing of intercultural competence and communication and so on and so forth. So I would say that. Sorry.
Okay, Elena, it's your turn.
Well, yes, I can absolutely state that intercultural dialogue, intercultural communication, and the actions that the instructors, the teachers perform with the learners make a difference. And I can, yes, think of many situations. And if you wish, I can tell just something that happened last winter with a group of students, with the doctors, as I mentioned. We had a couple of encounters with them to increase their sensitivity towards diversity and intercultural communication as well, because they was living together in a dorm. And so one morning, a guy from an African country came to me, to my office, and told me, I have to thank you. And I said, why? Well, because, you know, 2 years ago I divorced. I really asked my wife to leave my house because she didn't cook. She didn't cook for a couple of days. And so I rejected them, and I married to another woman. And the other day we had this class. I stepped in the kitchen, and there was two girls, two students of the same cohort. They were making food. And so he asked, can I share your food? And they told me, no, this is our food. So if you wish, you can have your own. And he said, well, look, for my cultural belonging, I cannot cook. I'm not able to. But if I set the table, if I help you with setting the table, and then I do the washing up, can I share your food? And they said, okay, of course, we can collaborate, certainly. You don't cook, we don't do the washing up, so it's perfect. And he told me, well, before taking this class, I didn't really think of collaborating in a different way. For me, the kitchen was just cooking and do the other things relating to cooking, and that was something for women. But then I realized that we can share other values, or that I don't change mine because I cannot cook, but I can do something different and have an active communication and an active and peaceful communication with my peers. And that made my day. And I think it was something very simple, but I believe that Lavinia and Fiora can have a lot of these experiences in different situations. And then you have the perception that, yes, you make a difference.
Okay, thanks for this. And Fiora?
Yes, I would say that the impact of intercultural communication education on students is huge. I would also, of course, I agree with Lavinia and Elena on everything, but I would add maybe that the theoretical knowledge of different cultures, of different traits, of cultural dimensions, different cultural parameters should be paired, should be accompanied by a practical involvement in a different culture, as Lavinia said, for example, in the case of service learning, or in the case of community engagement. Anyhow, there is a need for students and also for adult students to be engaged in practical activities and to be in contact with diversity, with diverse people. Maybe one last thing that we can add, and which is something that we're working on at Siena Italia Studies. We've been working on that, since ever, is the role of reflection in acquiring an intercultural competence. So this development of intercultural competence is not something left to case or, to life events, but it must be a conscious path. So students, both young students, both children and adult students, should be aware of their path, of their way towards the attainment of intercultural competence. And reflection, in our case at Siena Italian Studies, is a guided reflection, but maybe more generally speaking, being aware, being capable of reflection, being capable to reflect on the events, on the situations, on the reasons that stay behind the practical things, the superficial things that we see, is fundamental.
Okay, thanks for this. I had a last question, but I decided to just change it a bit, because in this historical moment, personally, I'm enough in the fairy tale mood. So let's imagine you in front of a mirror, and on the other side of the mirror, there is you at the age of 20, with your ambitions, with your fears, with your doubts. What would you say to convince yourself that the multicultural education is the right path to you? Which kind of recommendation would you give to yourself at the age of 20? Lavinia.
Oh, this is hard. I would just say follow your instinct, follow your passion for diversity. Don't be scared by other people's judgments, by what other people would like you to do. Just go ahead with your own perception of diversity and of learning about diversity, learning how to respect diversity and multicultural environments. I bet then the tale will have a happy end, because it will.
Okay, we missed just a few words, but
yeah. That if you accept the challenge, okay, the tale will definitely have a happy end. I will tell myself this.
Perfect. Fiora?
This is a very difficult question, actually. I would say that I would have said to myself, you like to learn, you like to study, you are curious, that's the right way to go. You'll be proud of yourself. I don't know if it's enough, but that's what came to my mind.
More than enough. Finally, Elena?
Well, I would have said to myself to perseverate, to be always, to follow your passion, to follow your intentions, and also to be patient, because diversity requires a lot. And I was not really equipped with this. When I was born, I was more instinctive, and I've changed a lot, also this attitude of mine, thanks to the diversity. So be patient, be humble, and persist, because this is what we need to persist, especially in difficult times. And I had quite a few in my life, so I would have said, be proud of yourself and persist. Yeah.
Okay, thanks a lot for your involvement as adult educators in the project. Thanks for being involved in this interview, and thanks for the interesting inputs you gave us, in particular also replying to tough questions, and that was my fault.